Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? Well, it is rainy and cold here in Connecticut, and I could not be happier. This is great. I am really digging it. I can wear this flannel shirt with no air conditioning necessary. It is not raining right now. It stopped raining, but it rained like all day long. But it did not rain yesterday, so my gig outside went great. So life is good. A lot of fun there. And I went to the doctor today after work and got a clean bill of health. Mostly, he wants me to go for a couple of tests, but for my age, I'm doing pretty darn good. So that's really neat. So I'll be with you for a little while longer. So there you have it. Too bad. Here I am. But anyhow, Jason, Dark Age Roleplay Games, and I and Anthony were talking about Ubiquity and the fact that he's going to be running a session of Hollow Earth Expedition soon. And it's funny, we have these two separate groups going in Facebook Messengers. One of the three of us that would started before our original one shot that Anthony wrote. So it's Jason, Anthony, and I. And there's another quad with Big Mike from Tef's Tavern. Because of this game that Jason's going to run. So we're talking back and forth, this one and that one. And after a while, I have to look and say, which group is this? What are we talking about? But we've talked with Jason about, as he's trying to wrap his head around Ubiquity and some of the stumbling blocks he's had, which are similar to the ones I've had, because we're both coming from the same background. People are playing like old school games like Lamentations of the Flame Princess or D&D. I gotta review this book. This book is great, but that's a different subject. As opposed to things like Hollow Earth Expedition or All for One Regime Diabolique. Ubiquity, different system. So it takes a while to kind of wrap your head around that, just to change gears. And so we're talking about all this, and I say to Jason, like in the little messenger group, I said, hey, I would love to sit there and have like a hangouts with you. We can do it privately. We don't have to broadcast it unless you want to. And I'll just go over like the mistakes that I made in Ubiquity, running it, playing it, because I ran a couple one shots, at least a couple one shots prior to playing with the group online, just with local people that were less interested in it. But I still gave it some tries, and I messed up here and there. I found out what I had done wrong. I figured it'd be kind of useful because I even said to him like as a comment to one of his videos, that the mistakes we make in life, whether it's playing a game or in any other facet of life, that to me is where I think we become the strongest in many cases. There's this old adage where it says, easy for you to teach what was hard for you to learn. And likewise, it's hard for you to teach what was easy for you to learn. I found that to be the case. Very, very true in life. But there's the parts where the mistakes I've made in Ubiquity, I've examined the system much more and realized, okay, well, this is how it works. And I think I'm a better player for it and have a greater understanding of Ubiquity for it. And likewise, in any other facet of life where I've screwed up and I've really kind of hit my head against the wall, where I've made improvements, I've said, oh, gee, this is where I've screwed up. I have a better understanding. In fact, I was talking to Anthony today about a better understanding about player agency, or where I take it away by accident occasionally. And these things were like, oh, gee, I didn't notice I was doing that right there, or I think I might have been towing the line. So we hit our head, we make mistakes, and we can self-evaluate and make some corrections. But anyhow. What ended up happening was Jason made a video of the mistakes he made independently, and I think he was a little bit too hard on himself. But I figured, why don't I make a video of the mistakes I made first, and then if we still want to talk, we'll talk. But at least we'll kind of have our, we'll lay our cards down on the table. And also, I was starting to make this list. I started jotting stuff down on my phone as I thought about it, and it started to be a long list. So hopefully this video isn't too long, isn't too rambly, but I think I've nailed these down to a few different categories, and hopefully I'm able to keep them within the categories. I may jump down a bit because the list is still just here on my phone, and I didn't take the time to rearrange it and everything. But I think they fall at least into three different categories, and one is just wrapping your head around using a die pool, especially like a yes-no die pool. It's a very different approach in some ways than using like a linear D20 roll, something like we're used to, at least Jason and I are used to. Next one is using things like style. It takes a little bit a while to really wrap your head around. And I think the last thing, maybe there's a fourth, I'll have to say, we'll find out as I'm going down this list, is bringing some of the conceits or ideas from your old game and trying to shoehorn it into a system like Ubiquity or any other system. Doesn't matter what game, whether you're going from one game to the next. Sometimes we make that mistake where we're trying to make the new game feel like the old game, or parts of the new game we're trying to alter. And sometimes we don't mean to, but that's what's happening. And I've made those mistakes too. So first off is things like the nature of the die pool. I've made mistakes. Some of the earliest mistakes I made were treating defense as a static number, almost like an armor class, rather than as a die pool. And what happens when you're a game master in Ubiquity you have the option to take the average, even during combat. I didn't many times, and I know Anthony tends not to because he likes to roll. But you can. In other words, every single attack, an attacker rolls his attack die pool, the defender rolls their defense die pool. If the attacker rolls greater than the defender's, then that translates into damage. So, as a game master, you have the option to never roll attacks, never roll defenses. Simply the player on the other side is rolling attacks and defenses. And as a game master, you take the average of the monster. We're going to call it the monster this whole time. That makes it easier, as opposed to the bad guy or the enemy and the monster. Let's use D&D terms here. You take the average of the monster's attack roll or defense roll. So say the attacker had 8 dice. He's always going to attack with 4. That's going to be his score. So the defender, when the character defends, they're trying to equal or beat 4 to take no damage. And likewise, if the monster has defense dice of 4 dice, then he would be defending all the time with 2. That would be a target number. The player is trying to exceed 2. The mistake I made in the first game was very often I was not rolling, but the players were rolling against the full defense. So I used the defense as 4. I was forgetting that it was a die pool and that needed to be halved. I needed to take the average. Very, very common mistakes. But they can cause problems. Likewise, I made a mistake in initiative. In one of the All for One games, there was one scene where I made a mistake in initiative. And when Anthony called for initiative, I gave my initiative score. My initiative score for Philippe, I think, is like a 5. And he says, initiative, I'm like 5. And I realized, we're like a round in, I realized, I shouldn't, I should have rolled 5 dice and found out what I actually got. So that's also very common sometimes to forget to roll some of those die pools in the moment, or not take the average, like in anything like defense. Which will segue into another thing. Remember that initiative problem I had. The other thing is any kind of modifiers. I made this mistake where I was given like a +2 modifier or a -2 modifier. That's the number of dice. That is not the subtracted or added to your successes after the roll. So actually, I believe what happened here, so you don't have to hold it in your head for that long, is Anthony, asked for initiative. I say 5. And I realized, oh man, I just kind of cheated there by accident. And then at some point, he says, okay, the person's going to attack you, but you take a -2 penalty. In fact, it was my second attacker, so I was taking a -2 penalty to my parry dice at that point, or my defense dice. And I made a roll, and I subtracted 2 from it. I subtracted 2 successes. I ended up taking a lethal wound, and I shouldn't have done it that way. I should have subtracted 2 dice from my defense die pool before I ever rolled them. So I kind of canceled out my initiative thing. I gave myself a free pass there. So you have to be careful with those modifiers. I have definitely made that mistake where I'm treating them like a D20 modifier as their additional successes or additional failures. I'm sort of modifying the final roll as opposed to saying, wait a minute, I have to remove or add this many dice prior to rolling. Very, very common mistake, but I made that mistake a few times. See, the next one would be calling for too many rolls. Like I've had situations, I ran a one-shot here in my hometown, and at one point the characters wanted to search for something, and it was something very easy, very obvious, and I called for a roll. I called for a search roll, and I realized afterwards that was kind of ridiculous. It was so easy that no roll should have been made for these people, and certainly not for the person that had any kind of search skill whatsoever. And so sometimes you look down as a game master, you start looking at those skills, and you start calling for rolls a little bit too much. Likewise, not letting the players roll sometimes, not giving them a chance. I made a mistake in the All for One game that I ran, where Nolan Inquisitor wanted to do this real long shot, try to get hired. And even though he had really very little social skills to go by, I could have given him this long shot chance to say, okay, you can use chance dice. There might be a negative die penalty because what you're asking is so bizarre, but I should have let him roll dice. Probably just with a Hail Mary pass, but like on paper might have had a 2% chance of success, but there was a chance. And I kind of violated that spirit of there's always a chance. And this can be easy to do sometimes in a new game. Like if I was running old school D&D or any of the retro clones, Lamentations of the Flame Princess, I would have no problem doing this. But because the system was different, because the mechanics were different, and because I was using these skill lists and everything like that, I got very concrete in my thinking both ways, asking for too many rolls, not asking for rolls when it seemed impossible I wasn't kind of thinking. Because one of the things about Ubiquity, to go off on a little tangent here, is that you can run Ubiquity or play it or interpret it in a very old school manner. You can do this very old school sensibility. And that takes a while to kind of step into those shoes and be comfortable with that because you're running this different system. But once you get comfortable with it, you can really make these interpretations in a very old school way. Not fudging the rules or house ruling so much, but there's some wiggle room in some of these. There's some room for some interpretation. Let's see what else. Really kind of learning the skills and not mistaking one skill for another. And it took me a while because there's a big skill list to realize what acrobatics does, what athletics does. Where's this demarcation line here? The mistake that Jason had made was in something like academics, that he was confusing, that it wasn't going to do him anything for medicine. It was really about book learning. So really just kind of getting into the skills themselves and differentiating them from each other, really figuring out what they are. That takes some time. I've made some mistakes with that. Let's see. Oh, here's another one based on the die pools. Forgetting to recalculate secondary attributes when you're tweaking the primaries. During character creations, one of the things I did with Spencer Halliday, my last character, I was looking, I even like put all the stats on the screen, had them roll up, made a nice annotated video, and realized that I believe it was his perception. I changed his intelligence, and I forgot to change his perception during character creation. I had the initial character, and I decided, oh no, I'm going to give him an extra point of intelligence by using a talent, and perception is intelligence plus willpower. And I realized I hadn't I haven't applied that intelligence point there. So anytime you tweak a primary attribute during character creation, you have to go look through all the secondaries and all the skills and make sure you didn't miss something. And so that's very easy to do. Let's see what else. Talking about the stats of monsters and NPCs, they're a formula. You have to look at, in the book, they have things like Ally 1 and Ally 2. And it's a basic formula for how many skill points these people have, how many attributes points they have, how many talents they have. The whole 9 yards. It's a formula. You can't just necessarily piece them all together. How many resources they might have if you choose to spend their experience on that rather than talents. And some of the initial creatures I made were kind of like hodgepodge, and then I realized it's a formula. There's a way you're supposed to do it, which can seem kind of constraining, but it gives you a good eyeball mark. So that was some mistakes I made. Another mistake I made for a while was it wasn't so much a mistake as I was just confused as all get out. I was running early Desolation, and I asking Anthony, like, how the heck do I really gauge the strength of these monsters? And he says, well, part of it is you really got to look at the averages on their skills. That gives you, like the combat skills, all that kind of stuff. It gives you a basic idea of how powerful they are. It took me a while to be able to start to eyeball that, a little experience in play to realize what that really meant. Looking at that list of tasks, hard, easy, very hard. Realizing what the numbers that correspond to those, realizing, looking at the defense and offense stats of the characters, of average characters, the people that might be in the party, and say, oh, okay, I can see where this, where these guys kind of end up in play. And also realizing, too, that multiple attackers make a huge difference because there's a -2 penalty to the defender's dice. So being outnumbered is a very bad thing on either side of the screen, so to speak. So it took me a while to be able to eyeball monsters because, in games like this, I can eyeball a monster in 3 seconds. I know what to look for. It was a little tougher in Ubiquity. So that wasn't so much a mistake as just a bit of a learning curve. Let's see. Doing something like extended rolls. Well, I still haven't called for very many extended rolls. But part of the deal with extended rolls and things like magic or whatever kind of extended rolls you're going to use, you treat the target number a little bit differently. If the difficulty is 3, in a regular standard action, unless I'm getting this entirely wrong, which I don't think I am, difficulty number is 3, you're rolling a skill, you've got to roll 3 successes. If you roll 3 successes or more, that's a success. But in an extended action, that's the number you have to beat. So if the difficulty is 3, the first 3 successes you roll, well, you've just met the difficulty. You don't actually start to get to start piling up successes, if I can learn to talk, over and above that, until you roll at least 4 successes or more. And that took me a while to learn as a player. That's what I was really running, shooting for. And I had a moment, I believe, in my one shot with Anthony, or single player, where a couple times I mistakenly had I gave him one number and I hadn't realized I had to to remember that I was giving him the successes over 1. So I said, oh, I've got 6 successes here. I'm like, no, wait, it's 5. 5 that actually count towards my total, as I was trying to get 10 successes to get away from the Cardinals guards. So let's see, learning this difference between generalized skills and specialized skills. That took me a second. I noticed that Jason had a moment trying to figure that out, because there's a skill list in Ubiquity. I forget how many there are. They're 20-something, or whatever the heck it is. It's not very important. However, each skill has a bunch of little specializations after it. Now, if I have acrobatics, I automatically perform at the same level of competence in all those little specializations as I do in acrobatics. So tumbling and break fall and all this good stuff. I can always spend another 3 points of experience and raise one of those by 1. Or in character creation, I can spend an extra point and raise one of those sub-skills by 1, or specializations by 1 during character creation. I can keep piling them up later on if I want to. That's a general skill. In a specialized skill area, something like academics, you have to choose one of those specializations. You're only going to put all your points in one. So it might be something like academics. I think I took academics archaeology. I think I fudged and said, well, that's got to be a subset of academics for my character Spencer Halliday. I think that's okay. You can kind of advocate for one like that. But that means I'm not good at any of the other academics unless I take a special talent to be like that. It took me a while to figure that out and to realize what all that meant. But part of the deal is, okay, now I'm academics archaeology. That's all that Spencer is good at in academics when it comes to rolling dice and having chances for success in something important. But in something like acrobatics, he is good at all those other specialties, despite the fact that he didn't take them. That took me a while to learn. I don't think I made a mistake with that. I think initially in character creation somewhere I probably did, but then I figured out what it was. But it was something that kind of confused the heck out of me for a minute. Let's see. Forgetting to boost talents. I am lousy at this. Part of the deal with a talent that you have, like I have a talent of parry as Philippe Moreau, and often he's been hurt by the second attacker because his number of parry dice goes down for every extra attacker. For another 2 style points at the beginning of a combat, I can boost his talent of parry for the entire scene. And often I forget to do that, and he'd be a lot more competent. I should be doing that, but I forget in the heat of the moment to do that. That's a really, really powerful thing, boosting a talent. Forgetting that monsters have style. These are all kind of under the style umbrella. Monsters have style too, and you have to take a look at it, and they can spend style points as well, and earn style points. And in the heat of the moment, style is a integral part of your character. It's also an integral part of that monster. So, remembering that they play by the same rules as the characters do. Here's one that just took me a while to wrap my head around because it's completely different than something like D20 D&D. Is in terms of combat actions or combat skills. Things like brawl, which is fisticuffs, kicking, punching, all that kind of good junk, is different. You have to put skill points in that to be good at brawl. You have to put skill points in melee to be good at melee. They don't translate into one another. If you're using a weapon, it's a totally different skill. Something like archery, different. Something like firearms is different. Defensively, if you're taking talents which generally boost these actions. Something like block, well, that blocks, when you're blocking, that blocks brawl attacks. When you're doing a parry, that blocks melee attacks. You can parry brawl attacks. Unfortunately, if you don't want to hurt the person, you're going to. If you score more successes, and dodge, that blocks things like missile attacks. So learning that these are all different. It's not like that one umbrella of the attack. Like what is my attack bonus? Where am I in the THAC-O table? All that kind of stuff. It's different. So that took me a second to. It wasn't a mistake I made. It was something that was just a learning curve. I had to wrap my head around that. Let's see. There you go. The last thing is well, let me say first, forgetting that things like resources are actually bought with experience points, both for monsters and player characters. So if you have a monster that has like a really groovy lair, or minions, or if you want to get those things for your character, if you want to have contacts, all that kind of stuff, these are bought with experience points. Once again, that monster, that NPC has a formula that they're supposed to adhere to. So you have to be careful just not to throw willy-nilly all kinds of stuff in there. That took a little while to wrap my head around and realize what was going on with that. If you want to know more about that, there's a video RuneSlinger made about all those kind of things, which is really cool. And the last thing, one of the bigger mistakes I've made is recently, in the session I ran, is importing perceptions of monsters and other aspects of the game from the game you're familiar with. In this case, it would be like all the OSR D&D to Ubiquity. I made the mistake of just kind of importing the conceptions I had of things like demons from AD&D into Ubiquity, and making the monsters, in this case, some of the non-player characters that were not human, more powerful in my head than they really should have been. Even though I had their stats on paper, I knew what they were like. In my head, I just felt they were more powerful than they really were, and that caused some problems. I didn't let players roll as much, or I believe I gave them a bit of an unfair advantage, and I didn't mean to. It wasn't intentional, but I get the mistake. What I'm getting at is the mistake I've made a few times is just importing that kind of mindset. Like, what was this really like? Not even from mechanically, but just through years of experience and play. And now I know what this is like. I know what this particular creature or monster is like. And you can make this mistake in any system. But I made it in this one. then importing that mindset. Here's a new monster. Here's a new set of stats. And kind of, even though I've got the stats in front of me, having this idea, well, no, this monster is a little bit more powerful than this. And it is difficult. It's difficult to eyeball Ubiquity monster stats. You have to play them a little bit differently. You have to interpret a little bit differently. And Anthony made a great video about that. And just in general, playing up to the strengths of the various monsters or creatures or NPCs. It's a little bit differently than just bags of stats you might get in something like D&D. So those are some of the mistakes I've made, or the things that have been like some of the biggest learning curves. So I believe probably those are the things that somebody like Jason might run into, and anybody else that's played more like D20 D&D, whether it's OSR or not, if you're starting to play Ubiquity. So hopefully this video was a little helpful. I didn't want it to be as long and rambly, and I didn't want to say and ah as much as I did, but so far that's been my experience, and I'm sure I'm leaving a couple things out, but those are really salient ones. So there you have it.